Watercolor flat wash techniques. That's what we're going to look at in this video. Welcome back to my channel and my studio, which is rather cold today. If you haven't met me before, my name is Michelle, and on my channel you'll find watercolor and mixed media and drawing tips and techniques, as well as a little bit of business, social media and online selling for artists. So please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell notification, you'll get notified each time I have a new video for you. Sounds simple, right? Painting a flat area of watercolor must be easier than all of those fancy techniques they do. Wrong. It's one of the hardest, if not the hardest, watercolor technique there is. And the truth is that there are some tricks to it. So there are tricks with the brushes and there are tricks with the way the paint is applied. In this video I'm going to show you 3 different types of flat wash. So we're going to look at a flat wash on a small area, a flat wash on a large area, and a flat wash around a complex shape. So I'm going to put a painting up now that I painted probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a painting of some poppies, and you'll see there's a flat wash background. Now this flat wash background is by no means perfect, because with watercolor it never is, and that's one of the tricks, is not sort of prodding around at your flat washes. But we're going to look at lots of other tricks. We're going to look at the type of brush you use. Now you might think you always need a flat brush like this one. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It depends on the circumstances of your painting. So what I'm going to do now is point the camera downwards and go through these 3 different types of flat wash, and I guarantee at the end of the video you'll have learned how to get your washes a lot more flat and a lot more even. So we're looking down at my drawing board and I've drawn a little shape, and the first thing I'm going to show you is how to paint a flat wash over a small area. But I'll show you first of all some of the tools that you need. So I've got several of my watercolor palettes here with some tube paint that's been squeezed out and dried. However, I might need a bit of fresh tube paint because it's easier to mix up a large amount of paint with it. Now if you are using pan paints, just a little bit of water on them, a drop of water on them in advance will soften them, and you might have to scrub them a little bit, so perhaps use an old brush for that. Now these particular watercolor palettes have got fairly deep mixing wells, which is why I like them. However, some watercolor palettes have really tiny mixing wells, and even these won't be large enough for a very large flat wash, for instance in a sky. In which case I'm going to bring into effect something like this, a little tub that I'm going to be able to mix a nice large amount of paint in. So the first thing to remember is you need to mix a large enough amount of paint to get across in one go. It doesn't matter if you're using a single colour or a single tube, you still need to mix the whole lot in advance. For one thing, if you have to stop halfway across, you'll get a drying line. For another thing, even with just using a single colour or a single pigment, you really can't tell how much water you put in the first time, so you're going to get some colour variation. So that's your first tip, is to go right the way across. Make sure you've got enough paint to go right the way across the area that you're working in, which in this case is quite small. I've got some brushes here. So I've got a flat brush here, and that's good for painting large areas. But if I've got a smaller area, or indeed an area with a lot of detail, I might need a brush with a point on like this. So this is your standard watercolor round brush. I'm not going to use a tiny brush. Again, the smaller the brush, the more likely I am to get drying lines. So what I'm going to do now is mix enough paint to get right the way across this area here. So here I've mixed a nice puddle of paint from some pinks and some reds, and the next tip I've got for you is to use a transparent colour or transparent colours, and the ones I've got in here are mostly transparent. Now you can do a flat wash with a heavy granulating colour like ultramarine, and you should be able to still do your flat wash and get it to dry evenly without major drying lines or back runs, but you are never going to get an effect as smooth as if you use a transparent colour. So that's just something to bear in mind, but you can still do a flat wash with a granulating colour. So I've got that paint ready. Now something else I'm going to have to hand is paper towel, or you could use rags if you want to be even more environmentally friendly. And what I'm going to do with this is, if I've got too much paint on my brush, I can just dab it on the paper towel and take some of the paint off of the brush, or if I've got too much paint on here, I can do the same thing. Now what I'm not going to do is dab my flat wash like this, because that's going to leave marks. But what I can do is I can use the brush as I was going to say a little hoover, that's a British term, a vacuum cleaner, a little vacuum cleaner, and you can dry your brush on here, and then it will suck up water and excess paint from your area. So what you're aiming for with a flat wash is to get the paint to dry evenly, and the best way of doing that is not to leave any puddles and to apply the paint evenly. So what I'm going to do on this small area, I've got my brush and I've got my paint, and I'm going to start one side and go across. Now it doesn't matter which side you start. I could start top to bottom, bottom to top, or left to right, or right to left. It matters not. But what I'm not going to do is start in the middle. Another thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go round the outside first and fill in. Now if you were a kid and you remember, obviously you were a kid, everyone was a kid, if you remember using felt tip or fibre tip pens, that's what you did. You went round the outside very carefully, then you could be a bit looser and just fill in the middle. That's a disastrous thing to do with watercolour, because the bit round the outside will dry before you fill the middle in. So never start in the middle, never start sort of one place and then you've got all these areas to keep wet. You always want to start one side and go to the other. So that's what I'm going to do now. Just turn my palette round, put it a little closer so that you can see it, and let's get started. Now I am working on a slight incline here. I've got no choice because it's how I need to film, but I advise you to work on a completely flat area. So lay your board completely flat. Now there is a school of thought, particularly for landscapes and big skies, that says you should have your board at a slight incline because it helps spread the wash down the paper. Whilst that is certainly true, you also then have the additional problem of dealing with the paint as it gets to the edge. As it drips down your paper, you're going to end up with an area like this, a puddle of paint. As I said, this board is not entirely flat. It's actually tipped slightly away from me because it makes it easier to keep the camera on it. So what I'm doing is going one side to the other, and I'm applying quickly and evenly. I haven't got to worry that I'm going to run out of paint because I've already pre-mixed more than enough paint to go across. If I get to this side and it seems there's a little bit too much paint there, I'm just going to dry my brush, lift a little bit of it out, make sure that there's no puddles, and then what I'm going to do is leave it alone. You can see it's not perfect. There are one or two things going on here, a bit of fluff on the paper there. Am I going to take this wet brush and put it back on this side where it's already drying? Absolutely not. That would be disastrous. You can always put another layer across, which will help to smooth the first layer out if you are not happy with it. But perfectionism is what destroys flat washes. So you need to apply the paint quickly, evenly, no puddles, and then absolutely leave it alone, and never ever take your wet brush and go back to the beginning. So next I'm going to show you how to do a much bigger flat wash, and we're going to use a flat brush now, because not only have we got a large amount of paper to get across, but we can it's going to be a sky, so we can afford to go off the edges, so we don't have to paint with a great deal of accuracy. So we don't need that brush with the point. We can use this this flat brush here. If I was doing a much larger painting, then I'd use a much larger flat brush than this. So the biggest brush that you can manage to wield, it's going to spread the paint evenly. That's what you want to use. Now I'm not messing around this time. I've made a huge puddle of paint. So if you look at this, this is Phthalo Blue, which is a transparent colour, and I've popped a touch of pink in because transparent colours are lovely, but this one can be rather icy for skies. So I've just put a little bit of pink in to warm it up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at the top of the sky and apply the sky down to the horizon line. Now you always want to put your sky behind the stuff on the horizon. The exception to that would be something like a white building. So if you had a white building, you would need to go around it. But anything like trees, you're just going to take your flat wash right the way down to the horizon, because green is made up of blue and yellow, so you can just go over the top with your trees. There is a case to be made for making your sky lighter as we get towards the horizon, but I'm not going to worry about that in this case because this is a flat wash video, so we're going to keep it completely flat. So I'm just going to start at the top. You can see how wet it is when I'm applying it, and that's on purpose because what you don't want is that paint drying the second it hits the paper. So you're almost putting more paint on than you need, and then you can lift any puddles out afterwards. So spreading, spreading, spreading. Now you want to be quite vigorous with it. I've just had to lift the board slightly so that it's on more of a flat from where I am sitting, And you see that sort of dry brush effect you get there as it skims across the paper. You want to avoid that at all costs. So I'm going along the horizon line here and I'm spreading. Now you've got to be careful. I want to make sure that there's no paint sitting under these edges. So I'm going to dry my my paintbrush and sweep along the edges. Okay, I'm just going to have a last look at this. I don't want to work on it for too long. Spread, spread, spread. It's getting to the point now where I need to leave it alone. There's still a danger, however, that some of these wet areas on the outside of the board could come in. So what I'm going to do now is take my kitchen paper and just wipe along. Don't worry if you even have to wipe sort of, you know, about a millimetre or, you know, 1/8 of an inch onto the paper, into the board, because that would be hidden behind a mound anyway. Far better than getting a back run or a cauliflower or a bloom, because what can happen is the paint can sit under there and then it can come back in. Now you'll notice here I've got a slight error here. I think that's a little bit of brush show that probably got on there from my last video when I was doing brush show. I've also got a little spot here. I'm going to just lift that up. Now it's really important that I don't go back into this sky with a paintbrush. It's easy to see something like that and think, oh my goodness, you know, I must sort that out. But really, does it matter? It would be behind a mount anyway, so I'm just going to leave it there. Even if it wasn't going to be behind the mount, the chances are I would leave it there and put another layer of paint and spread, spread, spread. So you can see now I'm going to leave that, I'm going to leave it flat to dry, and hopefully then I should get no backgrounds and no blooms, no cauliflowers. And I know that because there are no puddles on this paint and there's nowhere on the edge for the paint to seep back in and cause me a problem later on. So lastly, we're going to look at doing a flat wash behind complex objects. I'm going to put a picture up now that I did of a poppy field, and I wanted the background to be a flat wash. Now imagine if that were an oil painting or an acrylic painting. What I could do is I could paint the sky blue and then I could paint the red flowers on top. Now we know with watercolour it's not as easy as that, because the blue would show through the red, affecting the poppies. They would no longer be red poppies, they'd become purple poppies. Now I love poppies and purple poppies are great, but if you're looking for that traditional red colour, that's going to be a non-starter for you. So with watercolour, with complex objects, you actually have to paint the flat wash around the object. Now back to the one I'm doing here. Now I've got a rose here which I've drawn on the paper, and you can see I've got the background behind. Now this is going to be a peach rose. I might show you the rest of this in another video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to paint the rose for you on video. And I'd like to have a background, I think, that's kind of a lilac-y blue. So I've got my phthalo blue, and I've put some purple in it as well. And both that would be permanent blue violet is the purple. Both of those colours are transparent. I've put a little bit of opera rose in there as well, so I've got no granulating pigment, so we should be able to get a nice flat wash. Now if I didn't have anything else except the flower, if there were no leaves or anything like that, I would literally have to get the flat wash all the way around the background. That's a really, really difficult thing to do. In fact, I would say it's impossible to not have an overlap where you start and finish. Now it is possible with something like a wet into wet background to go all the way around without the join showing. There are ways of doing that, but with a flat wash, almost impossible. So what you want to do is, if it's looking really tricky, like you've got to get around all of this, is you want to divide up. So here you can see I've got some other things here. I've got some leaves and things that are dividing this this area around the rose up into smaller sections. Now if you're a beginner, what I advise you to do is to divide your paper up further. So let's look at this bit here. Maybe I'll just take another leaf out here. Now when you've got sort of a botanical subject like this, and you can imagine that roses are all growing together, you can have any amount of stems and things, you know, going in and going behind. Maybe there's a stem that goes in here, and then let's take it out the other side. It'll get smaller as it goes further out, so we could start here and perhaps take it a little bit smaller as it comes here. So what I've done then is I've divided this area and this area up, and you can continue to do that as many times as you need to, so that you feel that you can get round this area without having to panic too much. As I said, I could probably go round it in more or less in one go with a little bit of a gap on one side so it didn't show where I start. But if you're a beginner or if you're not good at flat washes, I want you to divide your paper up so that your flat wash areas are in smaller areas. Now this one here, for instance, we have to go all the way around here and all the way up there. So that's what I'm going to do next, and I'm going to use the brush with the point on again. So what I'm going to do is, again, if I have to do this area here, which continues all the way around until it hits the edge of this leaf. Now if I start in the middle here, what I'll have to do is keep both sides wet in one go, which is craziness. It's just giving myself extra work. So I can start here and go round, or I can start at the other end and go round. But what I'm not going to do is start here in the middle. You'll notice as well that I'm working on stretched paper. That is so important because it's going to minimize the amount that your paper crinkles, and that's going to make it easier for you to get the paint to sit evenly and not in puddles. So I do recommend stretched paper as well. I've got videos on stretching paper. I'll put a link above, and you can have a look at how to stretch your paper. So here's my paint. Now because this is transparent colour, it's staying pretty stable, but if it had granulating pigments in the couple of minutes I've been talking, they would have all sunk to the bottom. So if you are doing a flat wash with granulating pigments, every time you put your paintbrush in, you're going to need to stir so that you reanimate those and so that you get even colour application. So what I'm going to do now is start one end and go round. Now if you've got something with an edge that is really complex, don't be afraid to have two brushes on the go. So you could have a tiny brush to go around the edge if you're not good at going around edges, and then you could have a bigger brush for filling in the middle. But give yourself a chance. You'll be absolutely amazed at how easy it is to paint. Even with a big brush like this, as long as it's got a decent point on it, you should be able to get those edges there. Now see how much paint I'm using. It's not going to dry as soon as it hits the paper. Now remember that the hotter the weather is where you live, or at the time of year, it's flipping freezing here in England at the moment, so it's not too difficult. But if it's very hot, you know, you're going to find that that paint dries very quickly. So make sure there's a lot of paint on your paintbrush so that it simply cannot dry the second it hits the paper. Now as I go round, this area here where I started will start to dry, but I'm not going to worry about that because all I have to do is keep the leading edge wet and not leave too many puddles. That's all I have to do. I don't have to worry that the bit that I started at, and I would normally turn this round so there was no danger of me leaning in it, but I don't think you'll be able to see very well if I do that. All I have to do is keep this leading edge wet. So at this point, if the phone rings, if the doorbell rings, just leave it. If you're waiting for an Amazon package, you're going to have to consider what's more important, your package or your painting. Luckily round here the neighbours tend to take them in. So you can see that I'm just going right the way round and I'm not going back. Now even if I see something wrong with the bit I did at the start, a little bit of unevenness, perhaps a hair fell out of the brush, am I going to go and put my wet paintbrush in this here? No, I am not. You can always put another layer on. It's nearly always better to sort out mistakes after the paint has dried than to try and sort them out as you go along. And putting a wet brush into damp paper is the exact way that you end up with back runs and you lose the smoothness of that background. I'm also going to be careful with this tape here. As I said previously, the paint can just sit under the edge of the tape or at the edge of the paper. If you've got paper it's not stretched and it's curling towards the edge, you'll find you get a puddle of paint there as well. So you can see I'm keeping the paintbrush wet, and then as I go towards the end I'll try not to dip in anymore so that I don't leave a puddle here. If there is a little bit of a puddle where I finish, I just dry my brush and then I can just pick up the excess. So just spread that last little bit. I'm now going to take one little bit there. I'm now going to take my paper towel along the edge, just in case there's any moisture sitting under this tape that's going to cause me problems later on. And there we are. I've got a flat wash behind this edge of the flower. So I'm going to get on and do the rest now. I won't make you watch all of that because you'll literally be watching paint dry, but I'll come back in a second It'll be a second for you, about 10 minutes for me, and you can see the finished effect. So as if by magic, my painting is finished, at least the background is finished. So it's I just finished it round here. One or two minor imperfections. Although the colour looks quite strong, it's winter here, and it's gone 4 p.m, which means it's almost dark in England at the moment. I think when I look at it in the morning, knowing my love of bright colours and knowing that the rose itself is going to be very pale, I may well put another coat on. So what you can do if you want your flat wash to be stronger and more even is just put another layer of paint on. Just literally go through the exact same process on top. It will be fine. So I've got plenty paint left. Probably just put a cover over that, just put a little sauce on it so it doesn't dry too much overnight, and then I might put another layer of paint on it. And really, really looking forward to painting my rose now I've got this beautiful flat background. Do let me know in the comments if you found this video useful, or perhaps you have some of your own tips that you can share with us on getting a nice flat wash. I would love you to share this video too with anybody you think might find it useful. If you'd like to show me the results of your flat washes, you can pop over to my Facebook group. It's got exactly the same name as this YouTube channel. Please do click the like button, share, subscribe, and you can watch another one of my videos right now.